Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, May 8th, and we will hear the presentation, Integrating Sea Level Rise into Plans. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your GoToWebinar. And for your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar, and we will answer those either kind of sprinkled throughout the presentation, or we'll hopefully be able to capture a couple of them at the end. Coming up on your screen is a list of the APA chapters and divisions that sponsor the Planning Webcast Series for 2020. So thanks to all of you for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Planning Division, or HMDR division. So thanks to them for sponsoring today's session and getting this all organized. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. We are actually booked out through the end of August. We're just gathering up information to get ready for registration. So every Friday is booked from now until end of August. We're now scheduling actually out into even October and November. So be sure to visit our webcast webpage for up-to-date info on our sessions. This is a screenshot of our webpage. You'll see that we also have a prior webcast tab. There is where we post all the PDFs of our presentation. The distance education tab, we have 3 sessions currently available for on-demand viewing, one for ethics, one for law, and one for just regular 1.5 credits. So be sure to check those out if you need those specialized credits to get you done. Today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing, and you can record your credits by heading over to planning.org and logging into your My APA account. And then from there, you can either search by today's title or the event number, which is shown. And if you don't get a chance to copy these down and scribble them real quick, you can find them all on ohioplanning.org/planningwebcasts. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series. That's where we also provide updated information on sessions. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head over to YouTube, search Planning Webcast. We record all of our sessions and post them onto our YouTube channel. We have well over 300 webcasts. We have well over 3,000 subscribers. So be sure to join us so that you get up-to-date information when we're posting new sessions. Okay, I think that's all I have for my housekeeping items. Yep, that's it. I am going to turn it over now, if I can, to Nicole and Matt, here we go, to kick us off. Wonderful, the screen looks great. Go ahead, Nicole.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone. And this is the second in a series of 4 webinars that we are offering on sea level change, with a focus today on different choices for the whole series is this choices for practitioners trying to use best available science and applying this and then integrating it into your planning efforts. And today's webinar, like Christine said, it's being sponsored by the Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Planning Division. We're a newer division, but we have a very broad geographic reach. There's over 1,400 members spread across 49 states, District of Columbia, and 29 countries. And the division is focused on advancing the role of planners in hazard mitigation, discovery, and disaster recovery. And as planners, we have a major role in building long-term community resilience, and because our work really dictates how and where communities grow. And that means reducing risk by not putting people, infrastructure, or other lifelines in dangerous areas. And if you would like to know more about our division, you can get it from the APA website, and also send an email to apa.hmdr@gmail.com. So today's webinar is part of a series, as I said, on sea level change relevant to shoreline and coastal planners across the country. In this series, we're designed to address a range of topics. Our first webinar we held on February 28th covered using best available science for sea level rise. And today we'll be addressing integrating sea level rise projections into the plans. And then the next dates for the fall, which have not been set yet, although according to Christine, we better get going to get those set. We will have two more, one on coastal hazard areas. What are the best management practices for creating them, and then setting permitting and planning within coastal hazard zones. And then the final one webinar will be on sea level rise and capital facilities planning. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to your two guests today. I'm Nicole Fagan, and I am a coastal management specialist with Washington Sea Grant, where I help shoreline and coastal planners find solutions to their complex coastal issues, such as addressing sea level rise. Matt?
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Campo. I'm from Rutgers University. I sit in our Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. And so I work with communities on the ground as well as on the academic side, thinking about the ways that we work with our agencies, work with our municipalities, and also work with planners in the school to think about how we integrate resilience and science and all those topics into policy and planning.
Okay, so before we get started, we just a little bit about the series. As I said, today's series is about how local planners incorporate sea level rise projections into the different planning processes, and asking these questions of how does a local jurisdiction actually make that decision about what sea level rise scenario to use, and then how has it been implemented into different planning contexts and planning documentation. And so to get at this, we've asked three planners from different jurisdictions who are at very different stages and have taken very different approaches to join us. One we have from Charleston, South Carolina, Virginia Beach, Virginia, and Santa Monica. And we're going to start with Matt providing us first with an overview of the issues based on a report that he prepared last year that evaluated 15 different jurisdictions, and the study looked at the state policy options that for incorporating science-informed sea level rise into policy. Then we'll turn to our speakers, and we've asked them to each address what are some of their current experience, what are they currently experiencing with respect to the coastal hazards, then what sea level rise scenario they are using, how they selected that scenario, and then finally, how are they, or do they plan to incorporate these projections into their planning processes. And then we're going to end with a Q&A. We've teed up some questions. We're also going to be monitoring your questions to make sure that we address those as well, and we'll have time at the end for all of that. I'm just going to take a quick step back though and let you know what we talked about in our first webinar. We talked about, first of all, the components of sea level change, talking about melting ice sheets in the thermal expansion and that have been exacerbated by the greenhouse gas emissions. And we identified the areas where scientists are working to reduce uncertainty around major contributing factors, such as the melting ice sheets. We also talked about the differences in scenario versus probabilistic models for sea level rise and what that means. And then we provided an example in Washington State where we've developed the probabilistic models for projections, sea level rise projections, and then are now incorporating that into various planning processes. And then finally, we talked about the various tools that might be available for you to use in your planning processes, and also to work with use in your communities to help understand and visualize sea level rise projections. The video from this first webinar is on the YouTube channel that was mentioned, and this is the link on your screen, and this will be available for you afterwards. If you can't absolutely capture this right now, it'll be available. So today we're going to talk about the different approaches for selecting and then using these projections we talked about. And remember, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and we will be monitoring as we go along. Now I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Nicole. So if you just move to the next slide, we wanted to give everyone a lead in terms of this topic and what some of the things that we've seen sort of across the country as Nicole and I and a lot of you work in this area. And so one of the things that we'll be talking about with the panelists today is, what at the time that many folks, that are on this webinar get to the point of developing a plan, there's been a lot of work already, right? Sometimes that work has been over a decade. Sometimes that work has been a year. But in most cases, right, the plans don't start from zero, right? So thinking about the lead up time and the work that eventually goes into the different plans and policies that, planners in different jurisdictions, whether you're local or regional or working at the state level, how all that work comes together. It's also important to understand and think about the different approaches and authorities that folks use, right? So when you look at the state and at the local level, again, there are coastal plans and coastal zone management type focused plans, focusing strictly on shoreline, shore adjacent areas. There are climate change plans and climate adaptation plans that are about more than sea level rise. They're about greenhouse gas emissions, and they're about heat, and they're about rainfall and precipitation. You can look at those things from an emergency management perspective as well, right? Whether or not your state or locality is approaching this from a urban land use planning perspective or from a sort of Office of Emergency Management or hazard mitigation planning perspective. So there are a lot of different ways that states and localities are operationalizing the science behind sea level rise. And so we'll hear a couple of different ways that that's being done today as well. When we talk about the science and using the science, right, one of the things that we see is that a lot of these, again, a lot of the planning involves consultative process, right? So it's about planners working with oceanographers and working with climate scientists and working with folks across different realms and across different disciplines to really understand and establish how to best use that science, right? And a lot of the states and a lot of the programs that we look at around the country use some form of that, right? So it's not about the planning department feeling that they have to take this on themselves, right? There's a lot of consultation here that is helpful and beneficial and useful, and folks learn a lot about. And then also thinking about the ways that they use that science around concepts of uncertainty, right? Whether there are, states, localities, jurisdictions that use a precautionary principle, right? They want to plan for a high scenario or something like that because they're using precautionary approaches and they're not sure what's going to happen and they have to protect life and property, as opposed to other folks that might be thinking more about living shorelines assets or some other things where you might not use a precautionary approach. You might use a different type of approach. The different ways of using the science and how that gets reflected in the quote unquote one number or perhaps a range of numbers that people are using. And then, as a last topic, thinking about the partnerships that are involved here, right? How is it that when we talk about getting something into a plan, where does the funding come from those things? What are the things that help in both getting it into the plan and then, as we all know, right, getting it out of the plan and on the ground, right? Different types of grant programs, what types of capacity do you need within your organization, or what type of capacity can you gather from other organizations or other agencies that you work with, either in your locality or jurisdiction. So these are some of the things that we're going to cover today with our panelists. And so Nicole, if you go to the next slide. So today we have Katie McCain from Charleston, and Katie is the Director of Sustainability for the City of Charleston's Office of Resilience. She's been with the city for over 6 years, and oversees the development and implementation of both sustainability and resilience goals and the plans and policies and projects and programs that advance that action, right? So not only the development of the plan, right, but then all of the things that then fall out of it. Bobby Tijan was appointed the Director of Planning and Community Development for City of Virginia Beach, Virginia, in March of 2019, after serving in multiple planning roles, including zoning and floodplain administrator during his career with the cities of Virginia Beach and Norfolk in Virginia. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from Norfolk State and a master's degree in urban studies from Old Dominion. And then finally, we're going to talk to Elizabeth Barrell, a senior planner at the City of Santa Monica with 27 years of municipal planning experience, including coastal housing, local area plans, zoning codes, historic preservation, and a variety of projects, large and small. So those are the planners that you're going to hear from today. Nicole?
Thanks, Matt. Okay, we're going to change it over to Katie. So take it away, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, and we can see your screen.
Perfect. Well, welcome. Thank you so much, Nicole and Matt, for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I'm really excited to talk to you all about data in our flooding and sea level rise strategy here in Charleston. So Charleston's a pretty old city. We actually just celebrated our 350th anniversary last month, which was pretty exciting. We had to move that virtually, but we'll have hopefully some in-person events later this year. We have a population of about 150,000 people, and we're growing really fast. Our area in the city limits, you can see highlighted on that map, is sort of the orange color. It's actually a pretty large city in square miles, and you can see most people associate Charleston with just the peninsula, which is actually only 8 square miles of the entire city. But you can tell from that map that there are a lot of rivers and creeks that surround us, so we really have a strong relationship with water in Charleston. This is an interesting map we like to show. It's a Halsey map from 1949, and it's just of that Charleston Peninsula. And you can see those tidal creeks, and this is sort of how we get that nickname, the Low Country. We are very close to sea level in a lot of places. So when you take that map and overlay it on a current aerial, you can start to see where the filling of the creeks started to happen and how that has physically changed the footprint of the peninsula. So as you can imagine, since we're so low and we have so many creeks that were filled in and built upon, we experience a lot of minor coastal flooding. This is also known as tidal flooding, nuisance flooding, or sunny day flooding. And these incidents have been happening more and more frequently lately. We also get I think, over a fair share of major coastal flooding events. So in the last 5 years, we've had a major event happen every year, which is an interesting phenomenon given that the big event before that was back in 1989 when we had Hurricane Hugo. You can see the chart at the bottom, which was taken out of our flooding and sea level rise strategy. If you look to the far right, that's the concentration of our top crests in the harbor have been in those last 5 years. And note that this doesn't even include the 2019 crests. So this is actually a picture of a friend during the 1,000-year flood trying to take their dog to go to a bathroom break, trying to find some high ground. So in Charleston, we have all kinds of causes that form this multifaceted challenge. So when all these are together, they're so complex. So often we see a king tide coinciding with heavy rainfall, and that's just extra challenging for us. So our flooding and sea level rise strategy, we just did an update last year. Our original strategy was in 2015, and we've actually seen the science change from them. That's an initiative in the strategy, is to update it as science changes. It is not something required by law, as I know it is in California. But basically our 2019 strategy recommends that we plan for 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise over the next 50 years. And that is up from our 2015 planning horizon, which was 1.5 to 2.5 feet. So here's some data, and when we talk about data in Charleston, we are not the experts on this. We look to the experts. We work really closely with lots of partners who help us configure this data and analyze it, and look heavily to our NOAA Office for Coastal Management to help us with this. And they are just such a wonderful partner and really participatory. So they've been great to help us figure this out and help us develop recommendations. But this is just our observed sea level rise in the Charleston Harbor. That we have a tide station on the peninsula that we monitor this. And you can see over the past 100 years, we've had just over a foot of sea level rise in the harbor. And recently, we've actually been looking really closely at the last 20 years, and we've seen that over half of that foot rise has actually happened in the last 20 years, about half of it. So it's been really interesting to see that because that means that the rate of sea level rise is increasing faster now than it has been in the past, which means it hasn't really been a linear increase. It's starting to exponentially go up. So here's sort of the main map showing our planning horizon. So as I mentioned, we're using NOAA data, so that the fourth national climate assessment that was released in around Thanksgiving of 2018, that's the data that we're using, the scenario data. And working with all our partners, and like I said, especially NOAA, we settled on that intermediate curve. So we put a range around it, 2 to 3 feet. And the reason we put a range was to account for different levels of investment. So think of 3 feet as more like your critical long-term infrastructure, like a hospital, versus 2 feet is more less vulnerable infrastructure, like say a parking lot. We chose 50 years. It was actually a difficult decision for us. We like to think of things in terms of 30 years. You know, a 30-year mortgage is relevant to people. They can picture it. It's going to happen in their lifetime. And we tried to really stay away from 100 years or greater because we really wanted to make it relevant to people. But we also wanted to acknowledge the length of investment. So that's how we ended up with 50 years. And here's some data about the minor coastal flooding in Charleston that we have it in. Again, this is the NCA4 scenarios. So you can see if you follow that intermediate curve, the observed at the bottom is in that kind of yellowish color. And if you follow that intermediate curve, the minor coastal flooding is set to increase exponentially too. So this is really interesting. And you can see at the top of the screen in 2019, we had 46 minor coastal flooding incidents. So how do we incorporate this into, how do we include all this data in our plan? So basically we established the mayor's #1 priority is flooding. So we've established the flooding and sea level rise strategy to be sort of the overarching strategy for the city, anything related to flooding. And what we've done is actually include all the pieces of that as initiatives in the strategy. And we call it a strategy purposely and not a plan to help make it more actionable. So you can see, just as an example, if you look on that land use column, we separated all our initiatives into these 5 critical components. But if you look at the land use, you can see updating the city's comprehensive plan, updating the zoning ordinance after that, updating the city's consolidated plan, which is housing, and completing an all hazards vulnerability assessment. Those are pieces that we knew needed to happen, so we included them all in this plan, and that's how it's starting to take action. I should say also that these initiatives, when they were first published in the plan, they were static, but we purposely designed this so it would be dynamic. So this is actually, you can track our progress online and see we change these initiatives all the time. And then we don't have to go back and actually update the plan, but our residents can see progress on them and new and changing initiatives as necessary. So that's been a really important element of it. And then finally, to kind of wrap it all together, we had 6 major planning projects that have all sort of been connected, that are included as initiatives as part of the flooding and sea level rise strategy. The Dutch dialogues process we just finished last summer, and it's really this holistic planning approach, like how do you adapt and learn to live with water? The all hazards vulnerability and risk assessment we are just finishing now, and if you haven't done one of these or looked into it, I highly recommend it. Check out the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit website for more information. But it has given us so much data and information that our planners are really excited to use in our comprehensive plan update that is underway right now. So that's really exciting. Our hazard mitigation plan, we use the county's plan, and we actually have funds to create our own city plan and incorporate that as part of the county plan. And that will be a huge, that's a piece that has a lot of regional consistency on it. So we're really excited to kick off that potentially this fall. Our U.S. Army Corps of Engineer Peninsula Flood Risk Management Study is also another big planning piece that we've been really involved in. If anyone's seen headlines or about a wall around the Charleston Peninsula, that's this study. So the preliminary study findings are out right now, and that's really interesting. And then our stormwater team's been updating all of our stormwater program requirements and including that in an update of the master drainage plan. And then, like I mentioned, our planners have been taking so much data, and they have actually been doing a lot of internal processes collecting all the data for a while now to start our comprehensive plan update. And then I believe the public process of that is about to start here pretty soon. And then once we have that set comprehensive plan update that has, been vetted with the community, lots of public input, then, years down the road, then we can talk about refining the zoning ordinance to reflect that comprehensive plan update. So really exciting stuff happening in Charleston. They're all connected and they're all part of that sea level rise strategy. And like I said, you can find it online. And that's the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions for me right now?
Hi, folks. Does anybody have any different questions for Katie? Okay, we're going to take questions at the end. So if anyone has anything quick and clarifying, you can type it into the chat box. Otherwise, we'll give it a minute and move on. So we just had a question. Katie, can you talk a little bit more about what's behind the online tracker? Is that something that's part of a broader municipal program, or is it just for the Office of Resilience? How does that online tracking system work with some of the city goals and initiatives?
Sure, it's actually just a Google Doc that we've embedded on the website, and I would say it's managed by the Office of Resilience. So I'm the one in there updating it and working with our Chief Resilience Officer to refine the initiatives as they're needed. But that is all those initiatives are vetted through all the departments. So we meet regularly to talk about, is this something, do we need to add a new initiative or do we need to alter an initiative because something changed? So it's managed by the Office of Resilience, but all the departments are involved in creating and changing and implementing the actions.
And just another quick clarifying question, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Can you talk a little bit, Katie, about some of the funding that you were able to leverage for some of these? So where's all of this, Charleston City taxpayer dollars, or is some of this coming out of grant funds? What are some of the different ways you were able to put some of these tools together?
So are you talking specifically about creating the plan or the initiatives in the plan, I guess?
Specifically in creating the plan. So the things that went into the sea level rise strategy, as well as some of the tools that have come out of it.
Yeah, so a lot of, we used, I believe, some like stormwater funding to start the plan, and then we ended up finishing it in-house. So I was fortunate enough to work on that project, and it was really exciting. But we had the time and the expertise in-house to do it, so that's how it kind of finished. So it didn't end up, the plan really didn't cost us that much money because we were able to do it. A lot of the initiatives, however, have a very hefty price tag to them, so that's a whole different story, and that's a whole assortment of funding that we're still looking for a lot of it.
Okay, great. So we've got some other questions here, but we're going to move on to our next speaker, and then we'll come back to folks that have posted in the discussion. So Katie, sure. I think you're flipping next over to Bobby, right?
Yes, I will pass it on to Bobby in Virginia Beach. Thank you all.
All right, well, thank you. Try to get the slideshow. Oops. Sorry, everyone. Forgot it was where I was at, so I apologize. So again, I'm Bobby Tahan. I'm the Director of Planning for the City of Virginia Beach. And with me, I have CJ Bodner, the Technical Services Engineer for the Public Works Stormwater Engineering Center as well. And I have the opportunity to share a lot of the information that has been provided and worked on by Public Works as we're coming up to trying to do our best to implement all of these strategies that we've been working on. Just to kind of get you oriented to the city of Virginia Beach, the city of Virginia Beach, as is known now, was established in 1963, which happened with the merger of Princess Anne County and the city of Virginia Beach, which was the original 2 miles of oceanfront resort area. Now it's 310 square miles with 38 miles of shoreline that include portions along the Atlantic Ocean and the Chesapeake Bay. We have a unique situation of having 5 military installations that help to keep us very stable in general. And we have a population of over 450,000, which is the largest for a city in Virginia. But we are unique in the fact that we are surrounded by independent cities with no county over top of that. Causes for different challenges as far as we try to coordinate with different governing bodies, such as our adjacent neighbors as the city of Norfolk and the city of Chesapeake, and makes it hard for a unified solution as we look forward. But luckily, we do have a good working relationship with our neighboring localities. When you think of the city of Virginia Beach, you definitely do think about beaches, but we're not just beaches. A large portion of the landmass of the city is also agricultural uses. We have a suburban area with some of our highest and most expensive property along the shorelines that are highly developed. We have riverine situations with wetlands and other portions of the city where it is a bit more natural. And then we also have our more urban areas, which we call our strategic growth areas, along our major corridors and arteries of the city for our transportation network. So we have a lot of different challenges when it comes to dealing with stormwater and precipitation as we have these different type of development patterns throughout the entire city that we need to address. You can see these complex flooding pathways. You see some of them coming through our adjacent cities. We have, again, some coming through the Chesapeake Bay, the Atlantic Ocean, and through Back Bay, which truly comes from the North Carolina side. So we're impacted all the way around with some opportunities where we don't have the chance to directly impact some of the protection measures that we can do to protect the city from sea level rise, storm surge, and even some of our precipitation events as we deal with trying to put the water somewhere. So very eye-opening in 2016. We had 3 events that were very significant. We had a heavy rainfall event with between a 500 to 1,000 year occurrence in a 2-hour duration. We had Julia in September, and then Matthew in October. And we had the significant events that came up, which impacted Virginia Beach uniquely than some of our other neighboring localities. At that point in time, I worked for the city of Norfolk. The impact of Hurricane Matthew at that point was minimal compared to the impacts that happened in the city of Virginia Beach, where we had neighborhoods due to the saturated ground and also to maybe some of the stormwater design that was approved previously in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s that were impacted significantly, causing major flooding concerns throughout the whole city. And at that point, that really opened the eyes of our citizens as well as our city council to, we need to do something about this. On top of that, and I'm going to hand it to CJ to talk through a couple of these slides because these are a bit more technical. But on top of that, we also deal with our different types of sea level rise.
Good afternoon, everybody. One of the first things when we started this process back in 2015 that we looked at was where does Virginia Beach rank nationwide regarding the effects of sea level rise? And the chart that you see on the right is the record of water level recording stations along the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And the ones that you see highlighted in green are the ones that are within 60 miles of the city of Virginia Beach. In particular, the one that says Sewell's Point is located in Norfolk. It's the longest gauge on the East Coast at 90 years. And it was all showing a rise over the last century of about 1.5 feet of sea level rise. The one that's not highlighted there, just so you know, Duck, North Carolina, is actually about 5 miles south of Virginia Beach. So it throws in the fact that we do have it occurring throughout the city, not just on the Atlantic Ocean. So back in 2015, 2014, we received a questionnaire from Moody's, and it had a bunch of questions regarding resiliency. And since every city wants to be able to borrow money to do capital improvement projects at the lowest rate possible, and Moody's starts asking questions like that, you decide you're going to see what you can do about it. And our council implemented 2 CIP projects. The first is our master drainage update, and the second is the comprehensive sea level rise and recurrent flooding study, which we now call Sea Level Wise. With the master drainage study and the stormwater master plan, we've actually built models, stormwater modeling in the SWIM and MIC programs for the entire city, for every pipe 24 inches and larger. It allows us to be able to figure out where flooding occurs on design storms and where we need to, how we can make improvements. That plan is still underway. The models are all complete, but the stormwater master plan itself is being completed over the next couple of years. Primarily, though, we're here to talk about the sea level rise and recurrent flooding study. We started that program back in 2015. In 5 years, we managed to put together our final adaptation strategy report. As Katie said from Charleston, we are calling it a report because if we name it a plan, not trying to work around our city council, but if it's a plan, then any adjustments to the plan have to go back to council for approval. So after much internal discussion with the city, we decided it would be an adaptation strategy report. We did receive a grant from NOAA, and we want to give great thanks to NOAA for help us for this, because we've spent $3.8 million thus far just getting to the point where we've created our report. From a sea level rise planning scenarios, we were actually the state of Virginia, the General Assembly asked the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, VIMS, to actually analyze what sea level rise is occurring and what level that the Commonwealth should start looking at. Before VIMS actually published their report, we came up with that we were going to use 1.5 foot for municipal planning in a 20 to 40 year time frame. Remember, this was back in 2015, so that's 2035 to 2055. And that would be for any project that's a short-term project, a new roadway being constructed. We would look at analyzing those, put that into the comprehensive plan, and figure out what our vulnerabilities were in that time frame. We also created a critical infrastructure, a long-term awareness plan that goes out to the years 2065 to 2085, and we're looking at 3 foot of sea level rise for that. And for critical infrastructures, one place we have in Virginia Beach is called Sandbridge. There is one road, Sandbridge Road, that leads to that. That's critical infrastructure, because if there's a storm event, you want to be able to make sure that your emergency personnel can get in there if there is an emergency. So we are in the process of actually rebuilding Sandbridge Road, and we're going to build it with 3 foot of sea level rise in mind. The way we came up with these numbers is we looked at the historic trend at the Sewell's Point gauge, and we projected that information out to the year 2100, and that came out to be 1.5 feet. So we brought that 1.5 feet back to the midpoint of our municipal planning stage, which is the year 2045, and it intersected the Army Corps of Engineers intermediate curve. So we then went up that intermediate curve to 2075, which is the midterm of our critical infrastructure, and that came up to 3 feet. And lucky for us, when VIMS put out their information, they made a recommendation to the Commonwealth use 1.5 feet and 3 feet for designing for sea level rise in the Commonwealth. This has also been adopted by our Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, which is 17 municipalities in the southeastern part of Virginia, who voted unanimously to adopt these 2 levels as what we're going to adapt for sea level rise. And I'm going to now turn it over to Bobby to let him talk to you about the report itself.
So the report itself is a very good report. I hope everyone has a chance to take a look at it. And it does summarize a lot of the work activities in a unified framework. A lot of times what happens is we do these type of studies, and again, I'll be honest, the study itself came from Public Works, but Public Works knew that they needed to include all the stakeholders appropriately in order to make sure that there's full buy-in across the city so that we can get this done. All of us working for municipal governments understand the siloing that can happen, and it makes it difficult sometimes if we're not seeing everyone's perspective. So there's a unified framework that everyone in this large committee that we had been meeting in for a very long time, that had representatives from across the city to make sure that we're all on the same page. And included a wide range of adaptation initiatives, and it had strategies that were very specific to a lot of the challenges that we have in our watersheds. As I showed you, we have different impacts across the city from our flood potential, and we can't just have a one-size-fits-all for that. And so it had to take the time to essentially come up with multiple facets to deal with, which we hope can be something that can be shared with other localities that have similar impacts to many of those that we have. Of course, it had those high-level implementation timelines as far as coming up with when we should be looking to implement many of these portions inside the study. A lot of it had to do a lot of it was internal planning, updating plans, updating codes, providing things for citizens, and then also looking at what we need to do in order to look at making code changes with the Commonwealth of Virginia, because we are a Dillon Rule state. There are some things that hang us up because we have to have certain regulations that are allowed to us to be implemented. And of course, as we do these things, we can't just stop and say, well, I need more information. So we had to find a stopping point and say, okay, we need to identify additional things that need to be researched as well. One of the key things that comes from this, which is similar to Charleston's, is we have multiple layers of adaptation that we needed to find. The report covers many of those, dealing with natural mitigation, engineered defenses, and adapted structures, and of course, informing our community and preparing them for what's going on. This is very significantly different as far as how you deal with each of these, which is why it's important to have a wide group of people that have the expertise in each of these sections to help you. And it's not going to be found in one department, right? A lot of this is going to be found across multiple departments, and there's full buy-in from the city council, and the public as we continue to move forward. But I do want to say, and for the planners, CJ said some very significant numbers that we were able to put forward because the public and the city council had the will to move us forward, as far as millions of dollars to do many of these studies. But it's not the first time that flooding itself, or whatever those impacts are, has been addressed in planning. Many of you have done some of these things, of course, adopting floodplain management ordinances. And for the city itself, in 1992, we also adopted a Southern Rivers Watershed Management Ordinance, which specifically called out the southern part of the city because of how low it is and flat it is, and our agricultural that's been going down there, that it has its own significant challenges that need to be specifically addressed. In 2001, we then added an additional, essentially, a floodplain in the southern part of the city, adding additional restrictions that limit the type of development you can do, how much fill you can place, and addressing, again, some of the additional challenges we have. 2013, we increased our freeboard to 2 feet. And then in 2016, taking a lot of this information that has come from Public Works, this is a very key one. At least in the comprehensive plan, we already adopted into it that for discretionary approvals that are located in the Southern Rivers watershed, the southern half of our city, they're required to incorporate sea level rise and show that as part of their application for us to have an analysis to provide to City Council when they look at these applications. Now, because we have a green line, we are starting to see less rezonings in the southern part of our city, but we are having a little bit more redevelopment, which is why it's important that as we take the stormwater master drainage study and the additional information that Public Works has been working on, that we incorporate those into our development regulations, which will be moving forward in the next couple months, to make sure that we're also capturing those impacts on the redevelopment side and not just on the rezoning and planning side. And with that, we are open for some quick questions before we pass it on.
Hey, Bobby, just one quick question. Can you just give a quick overview of what the riparian rights are in Virginia? So what are the property rights that people have in Virginia that may or may not be different from other states when people are thinking about this?
So it's kind of a very broad question. So We do have
recognizing none of us are lawyers either.
TJ?
So just to answer that question, this is CJ. All of the bottoms of anything that's classified as waters of the U.S. in the Commonwealth of Virginia is owned by the Commonwealth. It doesn't matter if it's platted to individual people. It doesn't matter if there's a King's Grant, because we do have some King's Grants in the city of Virginia Beach that date all the way back to the 1600s. That doesn't matter. All the bottoms of any waters of the U.S. are owned by the Commonwealth, and to do work in that area, you've got to work with the Commonwealth. For the most part, property that people own is their property, as long as they are developing in accordance with the zoning ordinance and the requirements of the city of Virginia Beach. We generally, I'm going to say, don't give them too much of a hassle. Although if you talk to the developers, I'm not their friend.
So I mean, we also have we have some limitations on stemming from that area, dealing with Chesapeake Bay preservation areas, as well as in the southern rivers. We also have an additional buffer area that's there as well. So I'm hoping that we hit that question. That's sorry, I apologize. Kind of caught me flat-footed there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I experience Virginia suggests that particularly with Chesapeake Bay and other things, that's a complicated question. So any overview is helpful. Okay, so if you guys want to pass it along to Liz, we're gonna move along. I've got other questions coming in, and so we're gonna hold those till the end for the discussion. But you guys are gonna toss it to Liz.
Okay. Are we good to go?
Looks like it.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Thanks for confirming. Okay, thank you so much. My name is Liz Barrell. I'm with the City of Santa Monica. So we're going to virtually fly you across the country now. And I think what you'll see from my presentation is a very different context from what I'm seeing from my colleagues who've just presented. So the plan I'm going to discuss with you today is our local coastal program land use plan. So this is a document that's required by California state law. It's actually been required since the 1970s, when the state established the Coastal Commission and first began to mandate coastal protections for California's coastal area. The LCP is prepared by the local authority, but it must be certified by the Coastal Commission to become effective. The requirement to include sea level rise policies is a more recent addition for LCPs. The Coastal Commission guidelines have been evolving, and at this time, few California jurisdictions have incorporated them and been certified. So that's where we're at right now here in California. So let's start with a brief introduction to the city of Santa Monica. Located in Los Angeles County, Santa Monica comprises 8.3 square miles along the Santa Monica Basin. And of those, 1.5 square miles, shown here in blue, are in the coastal zone. 17 million people from the region and around the world visit Santa Monica annually. And Santa Monica is best known for its wide beaches and for the world famous historic landmark Santa Monica Pier. And less famous for knowledge about a current pilot project that is allowing a small area to go wild without beach grooming and create sand dunes. And we're watching this to see what we might learn about possible natural solutions for mitigating sea level rise. So one thing to know about Santa Monica Beach is that it has been significantly widened over the past century. The yellow dot that you see here in this slide, the dotted line, shows where the water line used to be prior to becoming a receiving site for sand removed in shoreline projects, and most significantly, the construction of Marina del Rey. The wide beach gives Santa Monica some advantages to hold back sea level rise over in the next half century, and we have fortunately not experienced the events seen in previous presentations. So the next section will summarize the scientific studies that form the basis for sea level rise projections in our LCP. Supported by an Ocean Protection Council grant, The city administered a study in cooperation with 11 other LA County jurisdictions to use new data and modeling techniques to produce maps showing projected sea level rise for the entire LA County coastal area. While many state maps had been developed by then, LA County remained as a gap in the coastal planning picture. The study was conducted by Terra Costa Consulting Group and Environmental Science Associates. You can see from the list of collaborators here, similar to as the previous speakers discussed, that we have a lot of expertise to support us in this very technical area that's out of our typical skill set as planners. I was fortunate also to work with the city's Office of Sustainability and the Environment, who were working on a strategic plan for climate action and resilience at the same time that we were developing the LCP in planning. The studies coincided with the beginning of work by the USGS on their own coastal analysis, which is known as COSMOS, or the Coastal Storm Modeling System. Initially, there was some concern about how different results might confuse the process and the guidance for local jurisdictions. While the inputs of these two studies were slightly different, leading to some small differences in results, fortunately, the scientists on both teams worked together, and in the end, the studies were able to back each other up, confirming the results, and with that, the anticipated level of shoreline change that would be a reasonable input for our coastal planning. These studies were key in providing a credible scientific basis to guide planning policy. Terra Costa incorporated the horizons from the Coastal Commission's 2015 guidance document and provided scenarios that layered multiple factors influencing SLR projections. As you can see from this graph, a 2012 study had anticipated a 3-foot change in sea level by 2100. With new data available, excuse me, this was increased to 5.5 feet at the time of the Coastal Commission's guidance document. But only a year later, the data in the Cayenne study led to the conclusion that sea level rise by 2100 might even be anticipated at 9.5 feet. As recommended by the Adapt LA Collaborative, we referenced the model results as an extreme scenario that would reflect the rate of climate change without international mitigation measures. These shoreline maps from the Terra Costa study provide graphic illustration of the model results for each of the planning horizon dates. These maps allow for a comparison of impacts at various sea level rise assumptions. This map shows the movement of the shoreline under the first assumption of 3 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And if you watch the orange line on this map, which shows 1.6 meters of sea level rise anticipated, you can see that the higher sea level rise starts to impact the beach, narrowing it significantly more. The extreme of more than 3 meters that we saw in the other graph was not mapped in the Terra Costa study. In this next section, I will show how we took the information from the studies and incorporated it into our sea level rise policies for our land use plan. While the most important section in the LUP is the policy section, it contains extensive background that provides context for the policies. The sea level rise background section focused on the outcome of the scientific studies and summarized future anticipated challenges. Figure 3, shown here, shows the context of anticipated sea level rise in Southern California generally and in Santa Monica specifically. It shows the low to high range projected by the models. And here in the policy section is that table that's translated into the basis for policies and for policies becoming effective. The dates are shown as an estimated time range, but the threshold is the measured sea level rise as monitored over time, which is required by our LCP. We determined at the beginning of the mid and the long-term levels based on the lower end of the sea level rise range for triggering the additional requirements. So I'll flip through our 5 coastal hazard zone maps. We call them maps A through E, which determine whether special requirements apply to a proposed project if the project is within a hazard zone, a coastal hazard zone. The shaded area is based on the 2100 projection in all of these maps. For map B, the LUP appendix illustrates both midterm and long-term impacts of coastal storms. In Santa Monica, coastal storms pose the greatest hazard of all of the various hazards for private and public properties, as you can see in these maps. In the midterm, the properties on the left, which are single family, multifamily, and beach clubs, are just out of the hazard zone. However, they are within the hazard zone in the long term. I'll just note that while the Santa Monica Pier, which is towards the middle of this aerial shot, appears to be within the coastal erosion and flood zones, the pier will remain above the level of the ocean. And although we do expect that the pier will be vulnerable as coastal storms grow stronger. And that's also a consideration, as this is a major facility for the city. Monthly tidal floods will cause more flooding events in the future. In the midterm, these will still not yet impact developed properties, but more significant flooding is projected in the long term and will particularly impact public facilities in our more visited South Beach area, which you see on the right in the bottom image. And the last two maps, D and E, define the coastal seismic and liquefaction hazards and the tsunami hazard zones. Of note, on the bottom image is that downtown Santa Monica is actually up on the top of a bluff, and so the tsunami zone stops abruptly where it hits that bluff. The LUP policy section contains 35 policies that pertain to coastal hazard zones. Of these, 29 are immediately applicable, 2 are activated when sea level rise increase is measured at 12.1 inches, and midterm level is determined, and the remaining 4 policies come into effect when the sea level rise has risen by 24.1 inches beyond the 2017 measured level. In some cases, policies are structured to differentiate between, based on the project's anticipated lifespan, with requirements such as additional setbacks and technical analysis for longer lasting development. Real estate disclosures are required when a property in a coastal hazard zone is sold. And other policies require technical hazard analysis and impose further restrictions on non-conforming structures in order to minimize allowing construction that may later be impacted by coastal hazards. Shoreline protective devices, which are highly discouraged by the Coastal Commission, are generally prohibited. LUP policies also require the city to prepare an adaptive management plan in the future to manage the shoreline and take effect when the shoreline has retreated by 30% compared with its recorded location in 2017. The goal of the plan would be to protect and maximize public access and recreation and to prioritize using soft adaptation strategies such as managed retreat, beach nourishment, and developing dunes and other natural structures along the coastline to protect properties inland without resulting in more beach erosion. When sea level rise reaches the lower end of the midterm spectrum, policies go into effect that would restrict new structures on the property to only small and easily movable structures. At that time, the city may also require a development impact fee program to collect funds for use in addressing coastal conditions. The LUP calls for consideration but does not mandate the city to develop this program. And finally, when sea level monitoring determines that the long range has been reached, policies are in place to restrict public access to the bluff tops and to move visitor serving facilities further inland, and to restrict the replacement of public infrastructure that is damaged and should no longer be located in those areas. A coastal property purchase program is suggested but not required. And in any case, these actions are quite a long way off for us here in Santa Monica and undoubtedly will be revisited by the City Council of the future. Santa Monica's LCP land use plan was adopted in October 2018 and is now pending Coastal Commission certification. There were delays prior to the current crisis and more because of it. We hope the hearing will be scheduled sometime this summer And then the next step will be the coastal zoning ordinance, which is now in development. The goal of that project, although still a couple of years away from completion, is full coastal commission certification and delegation of authority to the city of Santa Monica for development within its coastal zone. So thank you for listening. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thanks, Liz. Just a couple of quick clarifying questions. The real estate disclosure that you mentioned, is that a state requirement or is that local for City of Santa Monica?
That's a local requirement. We have similar such things for historic resources in our code now. And so we also wanted to add that as a requirement. So right now it's a policy and it will be incorporated to be actually required in the coastal zoning ordinance.
Great, thanks. Okay, so that wraps up our presentations. So Liz, I think you are passing it back to Nicole, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I am. Hold on, I'm looking for my button to do that.
Under webcam. And just so everybody knows, what we'll do now is we're going to invite all of our speakers back on. And if everybody wants to take yourselves off mute and also introduce yourselves visually, you can take your cameras and turn your cameras on so we can all see you. Thank you and welcome. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for your presentation. What we wanted to do is take this chance now to ask some questions generally, because it's what we're seeing is there's a range of things. There's a range of ways in which you all have approached the information, although you really have had to start with the science and you've pulled that in, and then how it's been applied. You know, it's at different levels for each of you. Clearly, all the way from, you know, just we're just trying to figure out where to use it to here it is in the regulations. So we just thought we'd ask a few more questions to get at it, and then also we'll pull in at the same time some of the questions that are coming in. Matt, you want to start us off with a question?
Yeah, so one of the terms that we hear a lot is actionable science, and we've seen different ways that you all have integrated the science into your plans. One of the questions that I see common coming through are, what type of outreach did you do? What type of education was there? Not only to get sort of expert technical buy-in to using that information, but also how did you think about communicating the various, you know, sea level projections and how you were using them in projecting floods and other things into the public domain? You know, how did that sort of education process work as you've been going through these planning processes?
You want to start? How about we start with Katie?
Sure.
Sure. So we actually our plan went through a committee at City Council. So it's called the Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee. And that's a public forum where people could comment and hear comments going through all the actions that were part of the plan. So that was our sort of public forum for it. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, I would say a lot less people get engaged in it just because it's data. It's very fact driven, and a lot of it, you know, you can't really argue with it. So it's pretty straightforward information. So the public piece was a lot easier. Now, just to get the plan passed. Now, with that came challenges, because I would say one of our biggest challenges is engaging the public on this, and that's why it's so difficult. So helping people understand, you know, what is that science? Why is it so important? How can it affect you? And how can you be part of the solution? I mean, that's one of our big, that we're trying to push right now is, how do we engage citizens? Because the city can't solve this. You know, we weren't funded to solve climate change and all the issues that came with it. So how do we get that broader audience, and how do we get citizen input, and how do we encourage and inspire folks to help be part of the solution and share resources?
Okay,
Bobby.
what about Bobby?
Sorry.
So unfortunately, I'd say that what kind of leads to the public input and the public buying in even sooner is just the fact that there are things that happen to the public. People now saying that things didn't flood before flood now, and flooding is getting worse. You know, a lot of it can be anecdotal, but a lot of it is captured. You know, at one point, and CJ may want to speak to this, we were accepting photos to show us your flooding that happened. That way, the public was engaging us to share the information so that we can also fact check it with our consultants as we were looking at it, looking for reference points so that we can determine flood levels and make sure that the models we were running actually were accurate according to what we were seeing out in the field. But the classic public engagement itself, we had over 500 residents participate, and for something as meaningful as this, we would hope for more, but for those of us that have ran our planning meetings before, you know that that's a pretty good number too. And we've held over 21 kind of public meetings to try to go across the city to try to get more people involved, and, you know, bringing it to them. You know, that's the hardest part, is you can't just hope they come to you, you have to bring it to them. But again, I think less people participated as we started moving along because they saw that we were acting on something that they were already seeing.
And Liz, in particular,
Yeah.
you know, one of the terms that you used in your presentation was international mitigation, and thinking about greenhouse gas emissions. Can you explain how you, you know, either talk about that or with the public, or thinking about the connection between greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation and resilience?
So would you be able to give me the screen again? Because I have a slide that will really help me to show you some of one of our more effective public outreach strategies that we had. Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so let me just put that on the full slide. Oops, presenter, there we go. Okay, so our most effective tool that we used, and we tried several ways to reach out. We had some panels, and we had some meetings all over the city, but we also used something that was called the owl on the pier, and we actually located these viewfinders, as you can see in the bottom picture here. We put them on the Santa Monica Pier and invited the public to look at them. We had some information that was up on, I think you can see that in the picture too, to explain to the casual passerby. And what we did is had a simulation of wave run-ups and of adaptation strategies that you see some images here of. And the owl also spoke. So when people came up, it talked to them and it explained what this was about and what we might anticipate. And we have fortunately not seen wave events like this for the public to understand. But what we were able to do with this is that people could look right out across the sand at what they see today, and then they could look in the viewfinder and see, with 3 meters of sea level rise in a coastal storm, this is what we'll be experiencing. And you can see that lifeguard station way out on the left in the middle of the water. And then we were also able to suggest some ideas, for instance, using adaptation measures of, you know, the soft adaptation measures that we were talking about. And we had a few thousand, I can't remember how many right now, at least 3,000 or more people. They were able to give input as well through the owl, so it was interactive. And people were very favorable towards these sorts of solutions. And there's concern that people are used to seeing their nice wide beaches that you just walk out on. And but people looked at this and said, you know, as a future solution to try to mitigate wave run up, this was a nice idea. So so this was a tool that we used, and we found it to be very effective. When we did have our public hearings, we had very little opposition to the sea level rise policies. And again, we're fortunate that this is, we're in a situation where we have a lot of time. I'm giving you back the screen. Okay, So we're fortunate that we have time.
And that actually is,
policy.
that's a great segue, because that's our next question we wanted to put to all of you, which is barriers in terms of moving forward. And in part, we know that you've got the issue of science and trying to figure out the science. You know, Liz, you talked about, you had the competing science, and Bobby and CJ, you've talked about where you had to do it regionally and try to figure out what science to work and to use. One of the questions we wanted all of you to address is barriers, a couple of them. One is science versus politics, and you know, which is harder to overcome in your jurisdiction. Bobby, you want to start?
Really? You want to go ahead, CJ?
I'll take that. The hardest thing for us is politics, because politics is mainly how you're going to get money. We can't afford a $4 billion project for the city of Virginia Beach to protect the entire city on our own. We're going to need help from the federal government. We're going to need help from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And you can't do that with some of the political arguments that have occurred. I do want to point out, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about just dealing with sea level rise. We were tasked by council to look at sea level rise. We were not tasked to look at the causes for sea level rise. So if you'll notice, the entire time, neither Bobby or I have used the word climate change until now, because we weren't tasked with solving climate change. We were tasked with figure out what's going to happen with sea level rise moving into the future, and how can we protect the city to keep it the preferred coastal destination of the United States.
And it's important to look at that, and CJ's point is valid. When we talk politics, we're not just talking about our local politics, right? There's this greater politics than dealing with state and federal level assistance that we're going to need to make some of this stuff work, and also regionally as well. Locally, we were given direction and told what to do, and we went and tried to do that to the best of our ability, and that was good to have. So I mean, there wasn't any inertia locally once we had those events. Again, it's all about what they saw, right? The city council saw it, the public saw it, and there was action to be made. And so we were able to, I don't want to say capitalize, because that's the worst thing you want to say with something that's impacted so many people. But we were able to utilize that opportunity, that everyone's newfound knowledge of what's happening, and we were able to use it to move us forward.
Katie, what about for you?
I mean, in Charleston, if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd have a different answer. So like Bobby had mentioned in his presentation, that as people started to see these events happening, we lost a lot of those misbelievers. So I think people are strongly believing now, and I think the science is, most people understand it. The politics are on a variety of levels are a challenge. But I think locally, like, one of our biggest challenges is, where do you spend that next dollar? So even if you have that dollar, how do you spend it? Because, I mean, when I showed you that map of our city limits, we have flooding problems everywhere, not just on the peninsula. So that it can be a push-pull situation with some of the council members, for sure.
Liz, what about for you? It sounds like you got the citizens involved, but was it a challenge just to get the science organized and figured out, or was there support? In some ways, maybe yours is a little different, because you had the push from the Coastal Commission that said you will do this. Wasn't that pretty much your difference? Right.
That's true, and there's been funding because of that for the studies that have been done. Our study was funded by a grant. There's other grants, you know, coming through, and our Office of Sustainability and the Environment has been working very hard on this. But I would say in Santa Monica, we have pretty much agreement on sea level rise. There's really not a lot of politics about whether there's climate change. There's not a lot of questioning about whether there's sea level rise. There's a lot of interest in finding out, you know, what are those impacts, and when can we anticipate them, and what levels we can anticipate them, and a lot of interest in planning for it. So we're fortunate that we didn't have that kind of opposition. I guess our challenges at the beginning were that we didn't have much information, but these studies have really filled in that gap. And I think everyone was pretty hungry for that information. I think our challenges going forward, frankly, I wouldn't have said that when you called me and asked me to be in this webinar, but in the last 2 months, our challenges going forward are that we've had really substantial funding and support for funding at the local level and the state level, but particularly at the local level, for all of these initiatives, all of these sustainability and climate action plan initiatives. And we're right now, our council is talking about cutting a lot of funding, cutting a lot of positions, and our Office of Sustainability and the Environment is going to shrink. And it's still really important, and nobody has changed their minds on that. But will there be the funding for it is going to be a question going into the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so for all the panelists, we have a general question that's coming through in a number of different ways, which is, how have the different developers, both private developers and large infrastructure developers, been treating your work? And by that, I mean, do you see this work creating action by developers that means they're developing differently, right? Changing their design standards, changing the way they incorporate, drainage and some infrastructure investments into their projects that are still in these different, I'll refer to them as hazard areas or, inundation areas, right? So are they doing things differently in places that will be inundated, or have there been places where, this information has resulted in some places being less developable, right? This information has changed the way the market thinks about doing work in those areas. And so, Liz, can we start with you, right? You mentioned the beach clubs and the private residences.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think we should go to the other two, because I don't think this has yet been really applicable for us on that front yet.
Okay, Bobby?
So CJ and I were jokingly talking about this earlier before we got started, and as we bring some of these applicable rules online, where even now we've been adding for certain projects that are coming in for them to be required to use a higher rainfall data, as well as sea level rise depending on where they're located based on their proposals. There's been a lot of challenges from the development community. Now, we've had a lot of people join us and saying, look, this is something we need to tackle together, and they know that they need to, at least the engineering community, and knows that they need to provide better proposals for their clients. And there are some people that are coming to us trying to come up with ways to do it, but then there are also those that just that are giving us a hard time, and a lot of the things that we're trying to do really just reflects currently what's going on, right? The rainfall data that we're requiring people to use, and depending on when their submittals have come in, are real rainfall gauge data that we know is higher than what the requirement is. And there's a lot of pushback, and there is pushback. And the hard part is when we add these things together, sometimes there appears to be a limited or no solution for some of the engineers out there to figure out how to make it work. And so that's definitely when we run across it. We can't, of course, everyone knows we can't do regulatory taking. We can't say you can't build on your property, right? And so, but we do need to make sure that we are doing the best to inform them, and also to give them solutions and help them build safely, right? That's what we want to do. We want to help them to build safely and protect their clients' projects for the future.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think there's certainly some developers who want to do the right thing, and part of that is they don't really know what that is. So guiding them and giving them recommendations is important. But at the end of the day, we all know how much more policy actually affects what's developed, right? So you can volunteer and try to do the right thing all you want, but there's only so many people that are going to do that, and it will only be so successful. So that's why for us, policy has been really important. We just finished updating our stormwater management requirements for new developments, which was a very intense process, if you can imagine. So that is a huge one moving forward. And of course, the comprehensive plan update will be a huge one moving forward too, because that we have we respect our property rights in the South very strongly. So it's important for that to be, a very open public process for people to get engaged in, and that includes developers. And it'll be really interesting to see how that comprehensive plan and land use allocations change and how that could affect zoning changes in the future.
Great. And Katie, just a quick follow-up. There have been a couple questions on how the historic preservation community in Charleston has been working with you on these issues, right? For those of us that have been, right, that downtown peninsula has a big, historic heritage and a lot of preservation assets, right? So how has that discussion gone with that community?
Again, if you asked me 5 years ago, I'd have a different answer. But given all the recent storms, I think the preservation community has really come on board. They've really been part of the process, and they are huge proponents for adaptation initiatives. So they, 5 years ago, we didn't talk about elevating historic homes, and now that's a high topic of conversation. Now, of course, that there's a very strict or just process-driven way for that to happen, and we have strong a board of architectural review that is very profound in making Charleston's landscape what it is today, and they are still very much a part of that decision. But together, the board has actually created, with a lot of input from the historic preservation organizations, they created some design guidelines to help folks elevate residences and buildings, which are really interesting. They're on our website, but it's basically like helps to guide that and provides that tool for people. So that's something that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago for sure. So
one of the issues with the using science that we wanted each of you to address, because it sounds like it's a little different, is there's consistency and integration and coordination. So there's two kinds of consistency we're curious about. One is consistency between different types of planning documents. So when you're using the science, are you using the same sea level science in, say, a comp plan, coastal plan, hazard plan? Is there consistency across those planning documents? Or, for example, like CJ with the talking, with his stormwater plans, et cetera. So that would be intra-agency. And then the other is consistency across your city to your county or the city to the state. So two questions of coordination. One is within your agency and the different plans, and then how are you consistent with other jurisdictions? And let's see, CJ and Bobby, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I'm going to start off. I'm going to talk about the coordination with the state and regionally. Bobby mentioned we're doing increased precipitation because we did an analysis of the stormwater requirements, which uses the NOAA table, and found that it's low. And we had shared that with the Virginia Department of Transportation, who had the University of Virginia actually verify our study, and they came up with numbers that are right in the same range, actually a little higher than what we're proposing for rainfall now and rainfall in the future. We are also, I mentioned earlier, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, so we're using HRPDC. And a lot of the municipalities, once we adopt our new Public Works Design Standard Manual, which goes to Planning Commission at the end of this month and Council next month, they're looking at every other municipality in the area probably adopting that same standard for increased precipitation. I did mention earlier, HRPDC unanimously agreed on the sea level rise. So we're all using the 1.5 and 3 foot in this area to be consistent. And and the governor of Virginia has a special assistant, retired Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, who is creating the Coastal Virginia Master Plan for adapting for sea level rise. And Ann has actually been coordinating with us and leaning on what we've done at this point in time to look forward to actually preparing the plan she's going to prepare for the state. I'm going to let Bobby talk about the individual intra.
Right. So I'm going to tack on just a little bit, for those that aren't familiar with our regional structure. The Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is they are not a regulatory body per se, right? They are not the county overseeing everything else. So it is a regional cooperation and an agreement and has the city managers and also the mayors of the cities that participate in it. And so they come to consensus and agreement that way, but there is no teeth to the group, unfortunately. We do have the regional consensus, but then everyone's time frame may be a little bit different than ours. So as we're trudging forward, we may be pulling everyone else along with us. So I did want to add that to it, just for those that weren't familiar with our regional structure. Intra-agency-wide, again, I'll refer back to that work group that we have and still have that works very hard to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're looking at it from a top, all the way across everything that we're doing, right? So even from our FEMA mitigation grants, from where the money comes from to our planning scenarios as we incorporate into our plans. And luckily for us, and interesting for us, we have a regional hazard mitigation plan that was adopted by all the cities. And so that hazard mitigation plan does talk about flooding, but it is more centered around other hazards as well. But there is agreement and through those documents and through the people working on those things. So it's been good to know that we were all on the same page.
So we're running close to the end, but I wanted to get in a comment from first Katie and then Liz, because I know they're very different. And for all of us in planning, it's that coordination. So Katie, you want to jump in and do it quickly, a couple of examples of the intra and interagency and state jurisdictional coordination?
Sure. Well, we use our sea level rise data. We use it all across all of our projects and plans in the city. I would say the one exception of that is the project with the study with the Army Corps of Engineers. So they're actually, instead of using the NOAA curves, they're using their own curves. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out. And it's been a topic of conversation for a long time. But internally, we all use the same data. I believe we're the only ones in the region with a flooding and sea level rise strategy. So that is very city focused. And regionally, we're more on a regional level with our hazard mitigation plan. And I know our comprehensive plan involves a lot of regional coordination too.
And we are very consistent internally. Of course, we did the study together, different departments, and that's not really an issue. I think regionally, it's very important that the collaboration that has been established continues. There is collaboration. Of course, we in Santa Monica are a little tiny town compared to our neighboring Los Angeles. So they're really the big players in the region. And I think we're all trying to be consistent with LA City, LA County, and at least as far as I can see, unless they're saying I don't know, I don't think there's a lot of controversy about trying to all go with the same data and the same modeling.
Back to you, Matt.
Great, everyone. So we're all wrapped up for the day, for the afternoon, or morning if you're on the West Coast, lunchtime almost. So the next one in our series again. So thanks to all the panelists, thanks to everyone for participating. We've got a bunch of questions still in here that we will follow up with folks on and see if we can't get some of these answered either with our panelists or through ourselves. And that's really it. Up and on the screen in front of you, we will give everyone a break for the summer, and then we will be back thinking more about these hazard zones, right? Thinking more about maybe a little bit more on the technical aspects of what's an overlay zone versus what these different types of planning tools are that we can use to start implementing some of these topics. So thank you to everyone. Thanks to all of our panelists. And then you guys, I think back to Christine, right? Christine, is there anything else?
I just wanted to reiterate that we are recording this session and it will be available on our YouTube channel. And also the first of this series is on our YouTube channel. You can just search Planning Webcasts on YouTube and all of our videos will show up. And we also have a PDF of this session available on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So everyone, hey, have a great weekend. Thanks to all of you, and we will talk next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks so much.